Hi, I'm John, and in today's video, we're going to talk about ninjas. Just kidding. Hi, I'm John, and in today's video, we're going to talk about diminished seventh chords and their usefulness in modulation. Now, as you've probably noticed by now, in my videos, I usually cover part writing according to the style of Bach, but that's not exactly what we're going to do in this video. Today, I want to cover a concept that I learned from my composition teacher a few years ago that really got me excited. That concept is this, that diminished seventh chords are a powerful tool to help us transition to foreign keys effectively and in as smooth a way as possible. It's a fascinating concept, and I'm excited about it, whether you like it or not. So what is a diminished seventh chord? A diminished seventh chord is a diminished triad that has a diminished seventh stacked on top of it. It is found only in minor keys, and its root is always the leading tone of the scale. The diminished seventh chord is an asymmetrical harmony, and I'll explain what that means in just a minute. The diminished seventh chord has some peculiar characteristics that make it uniquely suited to making drastic key changes sneakily, like a ninja.
We must become invisible, travel silently.
To begin with, let's look at what sets it apart from most other chords. Most harmonies are asymmetrical, meaning they divide the octave into unequal parts, which helps us as the listener tell where the root is. Let's take a C major triad as our example. We have two thirds stacked on top of each other. From the C to the E, we have a major third, and from the E to the G, we have a minor third. These two thirds stacked on top of each other equal a perfect fifth from the C to the G. And then from the G to the next C an octave above, we have a perfect fourth. Thus, the C major triad divides the octave into three unequal parts, a minor third, a major third, and a perfect fourth. I think you should be able to see now what I mean by asymmetry. Now, everything I said above about major triads is true of minor triads, except that in this case we have like if we take a C minor triad for our example, we have a minor third from the C to the E flat, and then we have a major third from the E flat to the G. And once again, we have a perfect fourth from the G to the next C above, the octave above. So as we can see, major and minor triads are both asymmetrical and thus provide the listener with a feeling of stability because the asymmetry of the chord, the unequal division of the octave into parts helps us see where the tonic is. But what about augmented and diminished triads? Let's take a look at those. Major and minor triads divide the octave into unequal parts, but the augmented triad, on the other hand, divides the octave into equal parts. Let's take a C augmented triad for our example. From the C to the E, we have a major third, and from the E to the G sharp, we have another major third. Now, this is where things get interesting. From the G sharp to the next C an octave above, we have a diminished fourth, but to our ears, that's really just another major third, even though it looks like a diminished fourth on paper. So as you can see, the C augmented triad that I just showed you here divides the octave into three equal parts that are all equal to a major third, even if they're not necessarily spelled that way. Because the augmented triad divides the octave into equal parts, our ears can't tell left from right and up from down, and that's why the augmented triad has often been used to convey an eerie, dreamy feeling in music. Now, as with many topics, we could do an entire video just dedicated to the augmented triad, but we need to move on. We've discussed the major triad and the minor triad and the augmented triad, but what about the diminished triad? Now, the diminished triad is a little bit different. Let's take a C diminished triad as our example. From the C to the E flat, we have a minor third. From the E flat to the G flat, we have another minor third. And those two minor thirds stacked on top of each other make a diminished fifth from the C to the G flat. But this doesn't divide up the entire octave. We still have an augmented fourth from the G flat to the C, an octave above. So to fill in that gap, we add a diminished seventh above the root. And the diminished seventh in this case is an A natural. Once we add this diminished seventh above the fifth of the diminished triad, we get an augmented second from the G flat to the A natural, and a minor third from the A natural to the C, an octave above. And even though on paper it looks like we've got unequal intervals dividing up the octave, really, these intervals are all equal. It's just that they have to be spelled this way. And that is how a diminished seventh chord is formed, and how it splits the octave into four equal parts. So at this point in the video, you're probably wondering, why all the hype? I mean, seriously, what is so great about the symmetry of the diminished seventh chord? Allow me to explain. The first reason why the asymmetry of the diminished seventh chord is so powerful for modulation is that because it's symmetrical and our ear can't tell where the root of the chord should be necessarily, we feel like we're tonally nowhere in particular. We're just nowhere. And because we're nowhere, we can go just about anywhere. Because this chord is ambiguous, it can lead in so many different directions. And that brings me to my next point. As you can see in this demonstration here, a single diminished seventh chord can be spelled in 8 different ways depending on the situation. Depending on which one of those 8 spellings you pick for a single diminished seventh chord, you will get a leading tone seventh chord for any one of 8 different keys. But there's more. You don't have to assume that that leading tone seventh chord is going to lead to a minor key. You could assume, on the other hand, that it's a leading tone seventh chord that's being borrowed from a minor key and being used in a major key, just to spice things up. If you do that, the total number of keys that you can modulate to going through just one diminished seventh chord is 16 keys. Let that sink in for a minute. That's pretty powerful. The third and final point I want to make about diminished seventh chords and about why they're so powerful in modulation is the fact that it's so easy to slip in and out of a diminished seventh chord. Sometimes the difference between a diminished seventh chord and, say a dominant seventh chord is so minuscule. It's a difference of one note moving 1/2 step. One very effective way to use diminished seventh chords in modulations is just to move directly from that diminished seventh chord to any inversion you like of a dominant seventh in the appropriate key, because all you have to do to get to that dominant seventh is change one note 1/2 step. So hopefully now you have at least some idea of why I geek out about these chords and why they're so powerful to be used in modulation. Let's end this video with just a couple of examples. The first example is from a piece I wrote called Ave Verum Corpus. It's for 4-part choir, and at one point there is a very, very quick transition from B flat minor to the key of D, and I had to accomplish that pretty fast because I had to get back to D pretty quick. So I used a diminished seventh chord. Here's what that transition looks like. Notice that I have to respell the D flat in the soprano part as a C sharp. That was really confusing for most of the singers who have tried this piece that I've written. Here's another example from Wagner's opera Lohengrin. So that concludes our short study of diminished seventh chords and why they're so powerful for modulation. I hope that this has helped you to whet your appetite to look into this matter further yourself. In any case, I hope you liked this video. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.